Phillip. So in this video, we're going to talk about Take Ivy. This is a book from 1965. The photographs are by Teruyoshi Hayashida, and the text is by Shosuke Ishizu. I don't know how to pronounce their names properly, I'm sorry. Toshiyuki Kurusu, and Hajime Paul Hasegawa. So, Take Ivy is a sort of documentary book where the authors and the photographer went to the Ivy League schools in 1965, and they took pictures, they interviewed people, they talked to people about Ivy style or Ivy fashion. So Ivy fashion, Ivy style basically came to prominence in the 1940s, late 1940s and 1950s, especially in the US. And then in the 1960s, it made the jump over to Japan and became extremely popular there. In principle, Ivy style is based on the clothing worn by Ivy League undergraduates in the 1950s and 60s. And there, over time, developed a specific set of guidelines, set of norms, and things like this for what's considered Ivy style. But one of the things that really strikes me about this book is that in the very opening portion, this sort of introduction section, one of the things that the authors say is, each Ivy Leaguer wears clothes in his own way while maintaining an appropriate student look. The meaning of freedom can be found in what the students wear at their residential campuses. The underlying theme of their dress is casual, yet neat. So, there are out there, like, I consider my style to be ironic Ivy, which I've said before on this channel, but there are out there Ivy purists, as there are with anything, and I'm actually in a Facebook group for Ivy League fashion, and there are purists who will, like, someone will post a picture of their outfit, and purists will say, well, that's not really Ivy, that's prep, or that's whatever. That's not even Ivy adjacent in some cases. That's British country clothing, or whatever distinction people want to make. And this is premised on the idea that Ivy style is a very distinct and limited approach to fashion. Now, I am not an expert on fashion. My fashion is sort of cobbled together from a number of different aesthetics, the driving one at this point in my life being a sort of ironic approach to Ivy style. But one of the things that this book really emphasizes, and that I find really striking in the face of the Ivy purists, is that the Ivy students themselves, the people who are supposed to have originated this approach to fashion, break the rules all the time. I mean, so Take Ivy is primarily a picture book. It's documentary. It's something like the photographs are meant to give you a sense of how to dress in the fashion of the Ivy Leagues, which is not necessarily the same as Ivy style in the purist sense. So, for instance, this one section, the caption is on 23 and the photo is on page 22. It's called A Tie for Sunday. And it says, unlike weekdays during which Ivy Leaguers dispense with wearing a tie or a jacket, Sundays are times when they don a formal outfit for church. Now, this is really interesting because the Ivy style jacket is one of the key pieces of day-to-day wear for the Ivy purist. Now, and I mean, we've got the photo here. You're getting a lot of glare on that. Yeah, you can't see it fantastically well, but you got some guy. It's a grainy photo anyway. It was 1965. Cameras were shit. So, I mean, we've clearly got these elements of what later becomes Ivy style with, like, the 3-roll 2 jacket, no... shit, I'm forgetting the term. None of this bit. You probably can't see it very well on this jacket, because this is a very dark jacket, but... peaks, pins, something like that. It starts with a P, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, and I don't care at the moment. But they're very just like plain front jackets. They don't have this little bit here where you have a sort of sewn together seam that makes the front of the jacket slightly more constructed. I don't have very many jackets without them because I'm a big guy, and they just don't make that many jackets for big guys that don't have these nowadays. And there's not that many vintage jackets for big guys because people used to be much smaller. Anyway, enough about me. So we get that sort of thing, and like we have this bit. We have this guy labeled an uncouth dresser. The description on page 72, the picture on 73. A student wearing a football jersey top, a pair of cut-off shorts, and leather sandals. A typical example of uncouth style. So, again, that's your boy right there. Ivy Leaguer. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I find really striking about Take Ivy is that for as much as there is a standard of Ivy style and Ivy fashion, much of what the authors experienced when they went to the Ivy League campuses in the 1960s, in 65, was that students had largely dispensed with it. I think that in the 1950s especially, there was a much more formal dress code, and probably jackets and ties were much more common. But one of the things that really has always really struck me about Ivy style, or at least has struck me about Ivy style since I really started getting into it, is that originally Ivy style was the teenage fashion rebellion of its day. And this is something that Raphael Spin talks about in the Gentleman's Gazette Ivy League primer, that the thought behind Ivy style originally was you would dress down from what your father would wear. So if your father was a business person or whatever it was, he would wear maybe a very formal suit. He would wear like a worsted wool suit, and you would wear a flannel suit or something like this. Or he would wear a suit, and you would wear a blazer and khakis. He would wear a traditional like silk tie, and you would wear a striped tie or something, or a rep tie or something like this. And so the idea was it was much less formal. It was this rebellious approach to fashion that still revolved around suits, blazers, khakis, ties and bow ties, things like this. And so, again, for me, it's very fascinating that you today have purists who have a very rules-driven approach to this fashion. Because, again, the fashion was originally about breaking the rules. It was about defying conventions. And so, for me, it almost makes more sense to think of Ivy style as a living dress code. And I think that's one of the things that we really get in Take Ivy, is this sense of like, there are elements here of that sort of 1950s very formal style. I mean, but we also get these very casual looking fellows. I mean, this guy, like I've been told by Ivy purists, you tuck your shirt in. Here's a guy, It doesn't say which Ivy League college he goes to, but here's a guy, shirt untucked. There you go. But again, then you also have these much more formal images, these much more formal outfits, like tweed jackets, ties, khakis, and so on and so on. So it's a really diverse style, and because Take Ivy is picture driven, it's such a useful resource for anyone interested in Ivy League fashion, at least sort of the late heyday of the Ivy League fashion. And it situates all of this within the context of the Ivy League and the Ivy League lifestyle, as opposed to just clothes. So you've got discussions of things like what types of sports are most popular in the Ivy League schools, how they interact with the community, how Ivy Leaguers eat, what their connections are with like the larger financial and political world and things like this. So you've got a very comprehensive approach to the actual experience of being on an Ivy League campus in the mid-60s. And again, it's a great document for anybody interested in the history of fashion or in constructing your own aesthetic, following that of the sort of classic Ivy Leagues.